In a world where we rush to Google for answers, hoping for instant solutions to our parenting challenges, we often realize that the help and hope we seek seems elusive. Welcome to Parenting Great Kids podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Meg Meeker, and today's theme is powerful. When your way isn't working. I think that resonates with a whole lot of us. It's a question that our guest, who happens to be the author of a book on this very topic, is here to explore with us. Because let's be honest, if my approach was truly effective, wouldn't I have seen results by now? Joining me today is Kyle Idleman, a man whose insights have touched the lives of millions. Kyle's a senior pastor at Southeast Christian Church, one of the largest churches in America. You might recognize his name from his best-selling books such as One at a Time, God's at War, End of Me, and Not a Fan. Kyle, thanks so much for joining us today. I've really been looking forward not only to meeting you, but to interviewing you as well.
I'm really glad to be with you. Thank you for having me.
You bet. So you've written a lot. You have a lot of experience. You've got a big church. You've interacted with a lot of different parents and professionals and all sorts of adults and kids, I'm sure. So what brought you to the point where you wanted to write a book on this, on why our way isn't working?
You know, I initially started this writing project around conversations I've had with a lot of people as a pastor. I meet with a lot of different people who are dealing with a lot of different issues, and typically when I have those conversations, I will, at the end, write a few notes down on my phone so I can remember some things they're going through and how I can pray for them. And after a few decades of doing this, I started to see different patterns of, someone's way not working in a certain area. And so initially I started this book with them in mind, and yet I shouldn't be surprised. God has a way of doing this, but I went through a season right as I was starting to write this book of just my way not working. I can talk more about that, but I just reached this point of, I guess I would call it exhaustion, just feeling really tired and not very motivated and worn out and more frustrated with results. And so it ended up being a more personal journey than I had planned on. But, I think that's okay. What God does through you, he often does in you first. And that was certainly the case for me as I wrote this book. It ended up being a little more out of the overflow of my life and my own experiences than I initially thought it would be.
Isn't he so kind?
Yes,
I think God has a great sense of humor. He says, you need to write this to people because they need help. And then all of a sudden halfway through you go, oh my, God asked me to write this for me. Talk to us about your way, what it was, and why it wasn't working.
So, at the heart of this book is this dichotomy between production and connection, that there are these two paths that we can choose from. They're not certainly totally distinct or mutually exclusive from one another, but they're very different in their objective and in their target. Production is, here's how much I can accomplish. Here are the boxes I need to check. Here's everything that I got done. Here's the list that I made and completed. Connection tends to be much more relationship focused. It's much more around people. It's harder to measure than production. The effect of time spent connecting is not always immediately noticeable. Like you can't always say, hey, look what I got done today through connection. And so what I learned about myself is that I have a real tendency towards the production side of life. And, I think especially parents can probably relate to this challenge of this list of things that need to get done and having to be intentional with connecting in the midst of all the production that feels necessary. In other words, it doesn't feel optional. And so for me, some of that production approach just caught up with me. And the way I thought I could get out of that situation is to produce even more. In other words, I turned to the very thing that kind of got me into it as a way to get out of it. And it didn't work. And what that looked like for me would be rhythms that were not very sustainable physically, emotionally, or relationally. So I was, during COVID, started to work really long hours, making lots of decisions and kind of dealing with lots of different, challenges, fires that needed to be put out. And so I kind of got into these unhealthy rhythms during that time and then just kind of kept going with it. I thought as we entered into that season, this won't last very long. And it just lasted longer and longer. I'm sure lots of your listeners can relate to that. And so I was just slow to recognize it. And then a friend of mine said, "Hey, I have an acquaintance who's an executive coach. Maybe it would be good for you to make an appointment with this executive coach because I don't think you've been yourself lately." And I'm like, okay. I've got some leadership challenges I'm dealing with. Maybe an executive coach would be helpful. And 10 minutes into this conversation with the executive coach, I realized he's a therapist. He's just calls
book,
himself an executive coach.
You always draw a line through that executive coach therapist because you didn't want to.
I wouldn't have probably signed. I wouldn't have said, "Oh, I need to see a therapist," because I wasn't feeling, necessarily overly depressed or anxious or anything like that. And yet, what he helped me discover, and really journeyed well with the book that I was writing at the time. What he helped me discover is that I had more of a connection problem than I realized. That I was neglecting some essential connections because of the production I had on my plate. The way I began to think of it and understand it is that the output required from me was, much greater than the input I was intentionally working with. I was always trying to get something done, and so the book really is an invitation then from Jesus to a different kind of life, a life that is, he describes it as a branch and a vine. He's the vine and we're the branches, and our main goal is to connect to him and then connect to other branches, connect with one another. And then out of that, production starts to happen much more naturally and in a much healthier, life-giving way.
Now, I have two questions. One of them is, why do we fall into producing more than we do into connection? Because in our minds as parents or even, business people, whatever, we think, I know that my family's important. I know I need to spend time with them. And yet we jump right into this workaholic, work mode, whether you're a mother running your kids around all the time, or whether you're, running a company or running a big church and writing books, whatever. What is it in the human heart that causes us to want to produce more than connect?
I'll give you an antidote of this. I came home from work, a number of years ago. I had a son who at the time was 15, 16 years old, wanted to play basketball with me. I would have loved to play basketball with him, but I had a number of things that needed to happen. I needed to catch up on my email. I needed to mow the grass. I'd been putting that off. And so I have this choice in front of me. I can go play basketball with my son, or I can catch up on email and mow the grass. I am drawn towards catching up on email and mowing the grass. And it's not because that's what I want to do. What I want to do is go play basketball with my son. I'd much rather do that as a father. But I get caught up in the email and in the mowing because when I'm done with that, I can point to it. I can say, "Hey, look what I got done. There are no more emails that need to be returned, and the grass has been mowed." If I go play basketball with my son, when I'm done with that, I can't really point to anything. It's nothing. Right. It's nothing tangible that I can hold on to or measure. And so I think that within a lot of us, there is this innate desire to accomplish, right? And I think that could be rooted in pride. Where I can say, "Look what I did. I think that can be rooted in insecurity, where we're trying to prove ourselves. And I think that can be rooted in fear, where if I don't get these things taken care of and I don't get these things done today, then, it's going to catch up to, I have to get it done now. And, so the reasons for that might vary, but I think oftentimes we have those two options. One of the things I would encourage people to think through is how they put together their calendar. So for most of us, we schedule our production and we try to fit in our connection, and to a degree, we may not have choice in that, meaning that a job's a job, school's school, etc. But a more helpful approach would be to schedule connection and then fit in production. So what would that look like in the course of a week if you said, okay, here are my connection points. Every evening, I'm going to go for a walk with my wife. Every morning, I'm going to have breakfast with my kids. On 2 days a week, I'm going to pick them up from school. One night a week, we're going to have dinner as a family. What if you scheduled for me, 15 minutes every morning, I'm going to have time with God. If you schedule your connection and then you go in and say, okay, here's the windows I have for production. I would challenge people to at least mess with that a little bit. There's to a degree, you can't always control it, but I think it's worth fighting for, because what we end up doing is the opposite. Our schedules fill up with things that have to get done, and we plan on scheduling connection, but it doesn't happen.
Work.
It gets the leftovers.
Boy, I mean, you're really sort of sketching out my life here, and but and one of those things, I sort of learned that with age, but I will still tell you, I still struggle with it, and my kids are grown.
Yes.
So, sketch us a picture of your life before this revelation and after, and then how long did it take you to go through this sort of transition? And what is your life like now? And specifically, not just what did you do, but what did it feel like living a crazy life without connection? And what does it feel like now that you've sort of turned things upside down?
I like to use the image or the metaphor of a dashboard on a car, and to think in terms of like 4 gauges that tend to be running hot when you're living this kind of life. And this was true for me. We're just kind of this busy, disconnected life. One of those gauges would be the discouragement gauge. Everyone's discouraged now and then, any certain day they might feel that way. But when you live with what I would call a lack of courage for a prolonged period of time, that begins to really take its toll on you and the people around you. It looks like a lack of motivation. It looks like a unwillingness to do hard things or to have hard conversations. So when you're discouraged for a prolonged time, and then another gauge on that dashboard would be just frustration, where you're more irritated with people for no real reason, and people who wouldn't typically create that feeling, that they tend to do it more. When you find yourself more irritable, I think that's a sign of this. Fatigue, when you're having a hard time getting out of bed in the morning and you just physically feel tired. And then the last one is anxiety, when that light is going off on the dashboard. And for me, and I think for many people, anxiety doesn't always look like worry. Sometimes it's just this obsession with trying to control things that you can't.
Mm-hmm.
That's what creates anxiety for so many of us, is the list of things in our life that we don't have a lot of control over has grown, and we're trying to fix those things, and it's not working. So I think those 4 things for me, those lights were blinking, and I had a few people point those out to me, and I recognized it eventually myself. And my doctor underlined it for me, my wife underlined it for me, and so that was kind of the before picture. I think the after picture, I'd say a few things. One, it it meant eliminating things. Like I talk about the process of pruning in the book, that, we should be in a constant state of pruning or praying for God's, pruning as the gardener in our lives. But when we neglect that, then, the pruning gets a little more painful. And so I took some time away from work. I took some time away from some commitments, and I just really focused in on some better rhythms and some better, healthier balance. So it looked like hitting reset for me, I think would be a good way to say that. I'd say secondly, it looked like asking for help. One of the healthy indicators of your life is that when you're going through something difficult, you're not going through it alone. Whether that's at work or as a husband or as a father, like I know I'm healthy when people around me know I need help. Like where I'd say to them, hey, this is really hard, not really sure about this decision, or I'm having this challenge with one of my kids. Can you help me think through that? Or, at work, doing a good job of letting other people really use their gifts. And so for me, it is being humble enough to recognize where I need help, and then not being too proud to ask for it. So that was the big thing for me, is learning to say, okay, here are the areas where I'm working hard to produce, and you know what? I need to connect and need to ask these people for help. And a lot more production has come from that approach than, hey, I just got to be the one to take care of this approach.
Love it.
Yeah.
That must have been very hard for you as a pastor of a big church, because you are the guy who has the deepest connection to God of anybody there. You're the guy who can help people whose marriages are falling apart, whose kids are wanting to run away. You're the guy who can fix it all. And so I would imagine that going to a few close friends and saying, you know what, I can't do this, has got to be very, very hard. And I think of a lot of men, I think in their families, in the work environment, whatever, seem to struggle with the similar issue of asking for help. I think in general, women might do it a little more easily because we have a lot of women friends and we talk a lot. Men seem to sort of hold things very close to the vest, and that pride, as you talked about, saying, you know what, I'm the guy. I'm not supposed to ask for help because I'm supposed to help others. I love in your book, I just wanted to read a couple lines. I'm in over my head. I feel like everyone needs something from me, and all I do is let them down. For the first time in my life, I don't feel very motivated or driven. This is when you're diagnosing that you have disconnection. Even though I know God's grace, I feel like I'm letting him down. This is the one I love. I feel discouraged, and I'm discouraged about feeling discouraged because I'm supposed to be the one who encourages people who are discouraged. So if that's you, what did it take for you, and how did you do it when you first went and said, okay, therapist, I'm on, please help me?
Yeah. Number one, Galatians says, to bear one another's burdens, and in doing so, you'll fulfill the law of Christ. And I did not do that. I was not doing that. I understood that to mean, like, if I'm going through something difficult and there's someone who can help me, I'll ask that person to help because they can do it. Not, bearing one another's burdens for the sake of just doing it was new for me, where I'm just going to say to a friend, hey, can I just tell you a few hard things going on in my life and ask you to pray for me? But I started doing that. I had have a buddy of mine who's a pastor, and similar challenges and leadership realities. And so we just started talking about once a week, and he'd give me two or three hard things he's going through. I'd give him 2 or 3 hard things I'm dealing with and challenges. We wouldn't try to fix it for each other. We'd just say, okay, good to talk to you. Pray for one another and be done. And at first I thought, this is so silly. Like, what are we doing? But I saw my wife do this well with her friends. I've seen that for a long time. And she kept challenging me and encouraging me in that. And so the more I did it, though, the more I realized. And then I found out there's all kinds of great science behind this. But So that was one thing of that was hard, but I began to grow in. And then I think the other thing that was especially difficult, and I think maybe true for other guys too, is that things that often make me sad come to the surface in frustration or discouragement.
Mm.
So what was really hard for me was to recognize, like, okay, there's some things as a parent, with my kids, there's some things that I'm dealing with at work that make me sad, and I needed to let that be okay. Like, okay, it's okay. It's okay to feel a little bit sad about those things. It felt more masculine in some ways to be angry or to be mad about it.
Of course.
And
Yeah. Yeah. It's
yeah,
more acceptable, I
yes,
think, for a man to appear angry than sad. And that's sad. But
yes.
so once was it hard for you to make that
Oh
connection?
yeah,
Gee whiz, I'm really sad. I'm not mad.
yes, it was very hard for me to make that connection. I still struggle with it, but yeah,
Hmm.
uh, I think the combination of as a pastor, feeling sad doesn't seem like you're not supposed to feel sad, and yet being able to hold joy and sadness together, that's okay. And I just didn't know that Jesus did that really well, right?
Really well. Yeah.
And
Hmm.
so but I didn't know that. So one of the things the executive coach / therapist had me do was, he said, "Hey, this week I just want you to write down 2 or 3 things that make you sad." Because he has me said, "When's the last time you were sad?" And I said, "I don't know. I couldn't even
Yeah.
tell you the last time I was sad." And he's like, and I tried to do that. It took me a while, and then I began to realize, hey, these things that I would say make me frustrated are actually things many times that make me sad, and that's okay.
Yeah.
So that was and still is, something that's still some new muscle memory for me.
Hmm.
I'm certainly not an expert enough to write on that particular part of this book, but I wanted to invite people into the journey I was on and join me along the way.
Well, I think that's so important because part of, me asking you to tell your story is, that's what Jesus did. He just told story after story. And it's through hearing a story that people go, wow, I get it,
Hmm.
rather than just sort of saying what you did. As you let go of productivity and moved more towards spending more time connecting with family and loved ones, did you feel guilty?
Yes, although not for very long. I will say that it felt freeing to me more quickly than maybe I thought it would, partly because I was really ready for it.
Yeah.
I needed it and kind of knew it. I think if I would have tried to do some of these things out of just a general, like, this is wise and healthy, a few years earlier, I would have felt a lot more guilt. But when your way isn't working, one of the beautiful things about your way not working and you knowing it is that you can't keep doing it. And so
Right.
the guilt gave way to freedom, pretty quickly. I'd say the guilt I have now on some of this is, man, the muscle memory is difficult. I
Mhm.
find myself slipping back into patterns, and just the intentionality is to be consistent is often the struggle.
Mhm. Talk about the vine and the branches because sometimes, and I've been involved in women's Bible studies, and women are all about serving the church. And basically, what they do then is they say, well, in addition to all the other things I'm doing, now I'm going to be a good minister at church, which means I'm going to add, 5, 6, 7 more hours to my week doing more things for the church. And so I think we have to resist that. That's not necessarily what God means by I'm the vine and I'm not just going to feed you so you can go out and do a whole lot more stuff, but you're the branches. Talk about what the vine and the branches really means.
Yeah, yeah. That comes from John 15, where Jesus on the final night with his disciples before he would be arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane is walking towards the garden and sees these vines and branches along the sides of the road. And he's thinking to himself, I feel certain, I have very little time left. What do I want to say to these disciples that I don't want them to forget. I dropped my son off at college a week ago, my youngest, and I found myself having very similar ideas. What's the one thing I want to make sure he doesn't forget? We spent years trying to teach things, but now not much time left. What do I want him to really hang on to? I think that's where Jesus is at, and what he does is he points them to this picture, and he says in verse 5, "I'm the vine, you're the branches. If you remain in me and I remain in you, you'll bear much fruit. But apart from me, you can't do anything." And I just find that really fascinating that he knows that they don't. He doesn't have much time left, and they've got a huge assignment, a huge production.
Huge.
They're going to change the world, turn it upside down. And he doesn't give them like a 5-year plan or a task list or say, here's how you can measure your effectiveness. And he doesn't do any of that. He just says to them, I think 11 times in those verses, stay connected to me, remain in me, abide in me. Because when that connection is prioritized, the production will come. If you remain in me, you'll bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can't do anything, nothing eternal, nothing that will really matter. And so Jesus gives them that picture. And I love that picture because it's simple, and I love controlling metaphors, but it's this idea of you be the branch. If you don't do anything else today, but you stay connected to Jesus, if you stay connected to the vine, if you understand your role as a mom or your role as a dad is first and foremost to be the branch. If you stay connected to Jesus, then trust that fruit will come from that. But if you focus all your attention and your energy on producing fruit, on being productive and accomplished, and then you can't really do anything. It all flows out of a healthy connection to the vine. And so in that passage, Jesus says, I'm the true vine. I'm the true vine. Stay connected to me.
Do you think it's fair to say that a lot of parents, Christian parents, non-Christian parents, doesn't matter, spend too much time focusing on the fruit and just sort of saying, this is what I need to do for my kids, this is what I need to do for my kids, and end up sort of burning out and feeling very discouraged? And if so, what are 2 or 3 things that you would say to them to say, pull back, stop focusing on the fruit, abide with Christ and be the branch and trust that the fruit will come? That's hard to do.
It is hard. Yeah, it is hard. And I think it's especially difficult on the parenting journey because, we feel so much pressure on the production side of things, right? And we, especially these days, whether or not the production is happening feels like it's getting, made known to the whole world, with social media being what it is. And, it feels like that's all on display. And that pressure can certainly feel overwhelming at times. And, I guess my encouragement to parents would be to think in terms of how this worked with you. Maybe it was a coach, maybe it was a teacher, or maybe it was a parent. The people like that in your life that had the most influence and ultimately produced the best fruit are the people who connected well with you.
Yeah.
They connected first, and then the production come. The people who put lots of pressure on you, use lots of guilt and shame and fear to make you do certain things or look a certain way or meet certain expectations. It didn't work. I mean, it worked for a while, but it didn't really work. It builds up a hard heart, builds resentment. It leads to oftentimes rebellion. And so I think, recognizing how that has been effective for you, I think that helps. And then part of it is just this prayerful faith where you say, okay, doesn't mean I'm not doing these production things, but I'm going to understand the best effort that I give to this is going to be, my prayerful commitment to my kids. That I am going to dedicate them to the Lord. I'm going to ask God for wisdom. I'm going to, I'm going to make this a prayer journey. And I think if you'll take steps towards that, you'll see a different kind of fruit that will inspire more connection.
Mm-hmm. So if you are a parent or anybody, even if you're not a parent and you're busy and you're producing, can you really trust God to get his way with you, produce whatever fruit he does or doesn't want to produce? If you pull back and say, okay, Lord, I'm cutting these things out in my life. I'm scared to death because I don't know what's going to happen. Can you really trust him to say, okay, I will lead you and I will bear the fruit through you?
Yeah. Yeah, that's it, right? Like that's the question that you've got.
It's
It's
hard.
hard.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. And but you're highlighting exactly the tension, that we feel, and then what our what we have to recognize is that most of us have the tendency to decide that we can't. Like I've got to, I've got to make sure, to cover this. I've got to make sure to, to hold up that end of it. And I guess my challenge to your listeners would be, there's a sense in which it's the Bible says not to test God, and then the Bible says to test God, right? So you have to decide which
Which
when are
one
the
do you
right
want
times to do
today?
that. But I think what would certainly be consistent biblically is the idea of testing God with things that we surrender. That when we surrender to Him and we see His faithfulness. I mean, that's certainly true in Scripture when it comes to finances. So I think that would be fair to apply to other things. And so maybe a great place to start. If you're listening to this and you're just not even sure where to start on this, I would encourage you to do, what I started doing. And that is, no matter how early I wake up in the morning or what production needs to take place, I just set my alarm for 15 minutes earlier. And I try to take the first 15 minutes of every day and go through my day and commit that day to God. I ask God for his direction and wisdom. If I'm meeting with people, I ask God to give me, compassion and grace for those people and give me wisdom with their lives. If I'm having time with my family that evening, asking God to help me be present, to help me not be distracted with my phone. Like I just take 15 minutes and I just pray through my day, asking God to help me and basically saying, okay, I'm going to be the branch today. I'm going to stay connected to you all day today. And so by establishing that connection early in the morning, first thing in the morning, I think it's a great step towards this. If it feels a little overwhelming or it doesn't feel that practical, I think it's a great place to start.
So for the person who feels disconnected and who understands their way isn't working, you would first take the first 15 minutes of the day, focus on God, pray, use that time, grab hold of your calendar, and I love it, and schedule in connection time. And then think about that metaphor, just like Jesus did, just sort of abiding and allowing God to get the work ready and then to communicate to you and then to flow it through you and for you not to worry about the apples at the end of the branch, which is, I think, for me would be the hardest
Mm-hmm.
part. Any other real clear tips that you would give that parent, that dad, that executive who says, this is me, I'm
Yeah.
going to read the book tonight. But other than that, practical things.
I guess the one simple equation I would say practically, I talk about this in the book, is that the more external input we receive, the less internal reflection we do. And, one of the most practical things you can do to connect with others is disconnect from some of the external input sources in your life. I'm thinking of your screen time, of your, phone, your news, your whatever it is, right? Like we have so much access to so much information, and all these times where in the past we would have had margin for internal reflection and to think about connections and to think about relationships, we're just filling that with external input. We're on our phones so we fall asleep, and then when we're driving or we're always doing that. And I think practically speaking, that is it's a hard thing, but creating margin for connection is often the most challenging part of connection. And so, take a look at your screen time and let that be a gauge. Let that, see how you can disconnect from that external input to have more internal reflection, connecting with God, and then more time to connect with some key relationships.
I love it. Disconnect in order to connect.
Yeah,
And
that's good.
I think it's a very simple but pithy point.
Yeah.
Because it's so true. You can't connect to two things at once.
That's
You
good.
can't be
I'll use
reading
that
your
next
text.
time. I like that. That is exactly right.
You
Yeah,
can't be reading a text and really paying attention to your kids.
that's
And
right.
your kids will tell you that
Yes.
over and over. My guest is Kyle Idleman, and his book is absolutely fabulous. Excuse me. When Your Way Isn't Working, Finding Purpose and Contentment Through Deep Connection with Jesus. Kyle, I could interview you for another 2 hours. This is so fascinating. Thank you for writing this book for me, because I have to go back over it again. But I am just thrilled. So thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Really grateful for the time.